does anybody have questions? We have for anybody here, including myself, questions. Yeah, Christopher.
Just sort of generally for the group, do you guys engage the planning community pretty regularly, like APA or other groups, to sort of make sure that we're linking our goals with everything from Williamson Act, you know, farmland protection, water, or aesthetics? Because it's one of the things we get a lot of comments from the building community that they try to do Z&E buildings or PV or other things, and they come up against problems with local planning approval. I'm just wondering if that's something that we might be able to improve.
I know I'll just start it off here, because I know that was one of the big things in the Z&E Res Action Plan. And I think actually something that BayREN has been working with the building community, but I don't think the land use planners have been involved nearly as much as they should be. And I actually have thought about working with OPR directly, because since they direct the general plan guidelines, they actually may be a good place to sort of spread our wings out, and maybe this is a couple places where we can actually jump into that. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in there and mention it.
There we go. Now it's live. Chris, that's a great question. Yeah, OPR is exactly where at least Kelsey has been engaged with on that planning front, in a lot of the streamlining of the solar permitting, and that will be also the venue and this is for making sure that it's cheaper, faster, and easier for building officials as well as solar installers to get their permits for solar, and they'll be working on that for storage as well. So they are engaged. You mentioned Williamson Act. We have worked closely with county officials and building officials, especially in the Central Valley, for some of the larger scale installations. We'll try to work with them to make sure that those issues are addressed. But it's a great question about another community that we should be engaging with. So I think it's a good question.
In Sonoma County, we did work with our local, at least the county itself, on a renewable energy ordinance, which lays out the parameters for solar installations throughout the county, whether it's rooftop or greenfields, and it lays out all the issues like you mentioned, the aesthetics, you know, is it within view of a well-traveled road? Williamson Act issues, we actually had one of our feed-in tariff projects run into trouble with Williamson Act. So yes, we do work hand in hand with our local community.
Great. Jenny? Oh, yes, sorry, Chris.
Chris, with the BayREN Code team, I also think, you know, we try to increasingly engage AIA, the architects, kind of professional groups, as well as work heavily with the building department staff as well. So I think that, you know, it's not on the planning front, but as you get to enforcement issues. So I think that it's that full spectrum that we're just, it's a big market, and how can we engage and where can we engage best?
Yeah, PUC generally doesn't unless there's a CEQA trigger. We do have a CEQA team, but I don't think most of these projects are would trigger CEQA.
Jenny Bird with MTC. I would, if anyone is interested, I'd be happy to try to facilitate a conversation with ABAG, now MTC. There's regular regional meetings with the planning directors, and it sounds like it might be a really good opportunity to convene that group. I mean, I know that you guys are looking at the state, but perhaps could be something that could be piloted in the Bay Area, because there are regular meetings and they are the decision makers and policy makers. So it might be a great opportunity to try to educate them on these issues. I'd be happy to facilitate getting you guys on the agenda and what that would look like.
That'd be great. I think that would be really useful. Yes, all the way over here. I need a.
I'm Kirsten Andrews-Schwinn with Peninsula Clean Energy. And Rory, I'm glad you brought up smart inverters, and I'd love to hear more about where they're at, where their potential is for addressing the current issues, and the rest of you who might want to comment as well.
What I understand is that we will be requiring them like within the next year. They are required. Sorry. Okay. See, and that's a pretty recent development, right? September. Okay, so yeah, a month ago. So that's what I know. Yeah.
I could follow up a little bit. Yeah, I know because there's like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 inverters, and we're not sure if the phase 3 will be approved by the time we do our adoption of ours, but we're definitely, the Energy Commission, we're going to be looking to require the latest of the smart inverters that was approved by the PUC as part of our code. You know, that would be part of the requirement of the PV, is that they have the latest smart inverters. And, you know, but that's sort of redundant because it's already required by the PUC, but we're just making sure that we, in our CVEC software, we appropriately value how those interact.
Yes.
Are we on? There we go. So
introduce yourself, sorry,
yeah,
just so the people on the phone know who you are.
This is Alexi Miller with New Buildings Institute. When Kelly, when you mentioned, I forget what you mentioned, but in any case, it was really memorable. It made me think that, so SEIA has recently put out a model power purchase agreement, a PPA, national level, not necessarily California SEIA. But I was taking a look at that, and within that model PPA, it says all the RECs, the renewable energy credits, which is basically the green attributes of the solar panels, right? They do two things. One, they generate electrons for electricity, and two, they're renewable. And RECs are a way to divide those two, and you can buy a REC to get the green attributes of that solar panel. In that model PPA, the RECs all go basically from the purchaser gets null power, and they all go to the seller. And so what that means is if someone has solar panels on their roof or in a community solar situation, and they don't have the RECs, they're basically fashion items because somebody else is claiming credit for that solar energy. So I think the model PPA is really a powerful tool to get a lot more solar going. I think it's really, really a good step. But I'm wondering, within the context of what we're talking about here, you know, local governments and community solar, have we got a way to crack that nut and make sure that the RECs are something that developers are thinking about? You know, on the homeowner scale, most people, it's way beyond their ken. But I just want to make sure that we don't end up with a bunch of these, you know, fashion item solar panels where the RECs are somewhere else and being claimed by something else, but the building owner thinks they've got a zero net energy building. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that, and others as well.
Sure. Yeah, that's you know, I can't speak as much to to SEIA's thing because I didn't put it out, but I do appreciate, and we do highlight a lot of their efforts in terms of these model things that can work all across the country, and then we work to figure out what'll work well for California. Ironically, the RECs in California, that problem's been solved by that's really just they're not worth very much because rooftop solar is not included in our renewable portfolio standard. I am definitely not trying to open up that fight again, but there are so the values, I guess, basically stay with our homes and businesses because there just isn't a market to sell that here in California. And I mean, I don't know, now it's just almost me answering person. Like RECs have been helpful across the country, I think, in like the early adopter type of scenarios of like, can you give an extra kicker to be able to get some projects going? I know that was, I was living in Utah for a couple of years, and that was an important attribute that was able to get some of those projects off the ground until you get to a real strong market. California does have a strong market, so I don't know if we need those RECs. Hopefully that answers the question. That's kind of some of the thoughts, but at least here, it's not boutique. It's doing it for you.
I think I would follow on to that, and I know I'm just talking with the CEC and the CPUC to a large extent. You know, RECs are sort of the last option that people want people to use here. And I think it's interesting is as you know, there's certain communities who have gone to 100% renewable by buying RECs, and that's great for those who can, and if there's enough out there. But really, how do we localize that? How do we create the local energy supply? I think it kind of balances that idea of resiliency, you know, because if we have it localized, that builds that opportunity. And so I think that's kind of where, as a policy, we're trying to push as well. So I don't know if anybody wants to add into that, but you know, that's definitely an element. Beth?
Beth Brumett with Brumett Energy. And I just want to support what Alexi is saying. I'm working with a client right now who didn't know until 2 years later that their 1 megawatt PV on their own site bought with a PPA did not include RECs. And if they're cheap, then maybe there's no opposition to having that requirement go in right now. But I think it's really important to have it go in. I have another question.
Before you jump on, it's added I just Chris Meyer with the Energy Commission. I'm not sure if any of you may have seen it. We did a workshop on community solar as part of our pre-rulemaking. We've been working on this for about a year. I think, had some talks with the PUC and others, just to start our thinking off and sort of where we're going. And we set up sort of a criteria of about, 15 criteria, and I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, of what we would consider a successful community solar project to get credit against sort of our building code, the PV requirement therein. Because we originally thought, okay, not all houses are going to be able to have PV, whether it's the fact that they have existing trees that we don't want them to cut down, or shading, or they actually don't build it on farmland and it's on a hillside and they can't have. We wanted another option. So one of the things we basically put in there to address this is, that to qualify it had to be additional. It couldn't be something that was going to happen anyway. It had to be basically dedicated to that house. It couldn't move like with GTSR, some of the other programs where it doesn't move with the homeowner. When they move to another house, they keep that credit with them. It has to stay with the asset, the building. But one of the big things is the durability, the additionality. We didn't want a bunch of paper sort of credits out there that really weren't increasing, the solar energy in California. But also there was a lot of some of the other ones. If you look at that list, we have, and it also goes things as for, does it help the local grid? Because if you basically have a bunch of renewable energy in Bakersfield, but you have a bunch of load in Marin County, is that really helping the local situation and the local grid for harmony?
Thanks, Chris. Betsy, you want to ask the second part of your question?
Yes, thank you. I'm very concerned as we are going forward that we're changing zero energy to zero electricity. And I completely understand why we're doing that for the res code and the EDR and the challenges of the duck curve. But I have two comments on that. One is that I really recommend that we call it something else, zero electricity or some other thing, because 2 or 3 years are going to go by really quickly and we're going to have huge confusion out there. Secondly, maybe the problem is smaller than we think it is. So I have a question for the technology folks. As we look at this heat pump water heater option, we're basically saying, hey, we're going to let the thermal heating for water heating and space heating remain mixed fuel, stay gas, because of this problem with the duck curve. But what we have sitting right in front of us is thermal storage in the form of water. So what if we just had heat pump water heaters that are driving water heating and space heating, and we simply have the code identify controls that those can't operate during peak loads? They're in storage mode during peak draw times. And then maybe there could be an exception that if they have a dashboard where the customer knows that they got a time of use meter and they're going to pay, $2 a kilowatt hour instead of 20 cents a kilowatt hour for that time, that they can choose that. But it seems like we've got the solution sitting right in front of us. How far away is that from being possible?
Yeah, I think that's you've hit the big elephant in the room, which is gas. And in some of the ZNE homes, they said, oh, well, we're just going to have gas fireplaces and stoves. But anyway, I'm going to let the other folks hit on this one.
That actually is a part of our heat pump water heater program that we're trying to get up and running, is that they do need to be grid interactive. That can take a signal, it can, I don't want to say superheat, but overheat at certain times to store, like I said, thermal energy through the peak periods. And it's definitely something we're thinking about. Our focus at this point is, and I hate to say this in this room, it's not necessarily zero net energy, it's fuel switching. We want to get people off of that.
And I think one of the things, I'll just add another thing, Beth, which I think is something that the stakeholders I've worked with have tried to say, the code is the code. Let's let it be the code and not be ZNE. So I think what you brought up is this confusion. Let's call that the code. And I think Christopher's on board with that, as is the CEC. And then Z&E is closer to what Rory presented in terms of the definitions the DGS is doing, which is a more holistic thing, because what Christopher's trying to do is a cost-effective approach to get to, high energy efficiency and a low carbon, and that's challenging with elephants and so forth that are running around rampantly. So I think that's a way of also just disaggregate those two. Code is code, and then Z&E is Z&E, and that may help us a little bit, at least in the short term. Christopher's nodding his head.
I had one quick thing actually that triggered a better answer to your question. So we can look at examples across the country, which is one of the great things about local governments and trying out some experiments and seeing if it works and see if it can trickle up to the state level or federal level. So there's a rural co-op in Minnesota that had a community solar program, but they required the customers that signed up for the community solar to actually have electric water heaters with demand response in their actual homes. So it's kind of community storage, but it was localized behind the meter, as it were. So I think we need to be creative in thinking about what we can do with a variety of different technologies to be able to address this challenge.
Yes.
Jeff Alves, Peninsula Clean Energy. With all these local distributed resources, the water heaters, the electric vehicles, the rooftop systems, all of them, they need to be in some way dispatchable. And so somebody has to actually, if they're going to interact with the grid, someone has to be on the other end of that. Who's going to actually run all those grid interactions? What are the imagine the technical hurdles, but what are the big regulatory hurdles that you see that need to be overcome to make that the grid truly interactive, the way you're describing?
We are attempting to do that at this point with the electric car chargers, and we expect that to inform what we do in the future. It's a series of contracts between the customer and the what we call the technical aggregators. That's the own connects, that's the nests, the whoever is running that software at the appliance level. And then you have to take that through an aggregator and scheduling coordinator that is able to work with the CAISO to bid that into their system and work out all those relationships. And the key is being able to aggregate many loads, many appliances into that type of a system. And it's big data, and people are getting used to working with big data. And like I mentioned, we're running a pilot, hopefully by the end of this year, and that will again inform where we go in our next steps with demand response.
And I think CalISO, to follow on to that, is also doing some DER pilots for storage, which is directly linked to CCAs. They see the build this, and they enabled this, I think, at the beginning of either this year or last year, losing time here, but to allow the third party to use storage as a resource and generate revenue. So it creates an opportunity to do some of the things that they're doing in Sonoma. But I don't know, Rory, do you want to add anything to this, to the regulatory barriers around that we're facing?
Nothing, I mean, in terms of, no, not really. Because I need to be, careful about how I represent.
Being coy.
Yes,
okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I know there are also some DER pilots. I think each utility is required at least one DER pilot. And I think one of the things that we're looking at in the commercial action plan is DER has lived over here. EE has lived over here, and Z&E is like somewhere in between. And so we're trying to bring those pieces together. And with the CPUC, we're actually having conversations across that. So I don't think we have the full answer. It's good to see some of the piloting, but I think that's still, there's governance issues that go along with that. Who owns the power? Who controls the power? If it's on your roof, is it yours? Is it leased? There's a whole bunch of things. And I think groups like Tesla are creating third-party solutions also that are all being deployed. So I think we need, in my mind, creating performance standards that allow some innovation so that we can figure that out without saying this is the best way is going to work. I mean, I think of a San Francisco versus a Hayward. We have such different environments. We have to have different solutions in those different cases. So I don't know, Lauren.
So I'm trying to think of how to frame this as a question. Just wanted to follow up on the comment from the woman from Tesla earlier about the financial analysis that the commission has done around this work and the fact that it maybe underrepresented the benefits or didn't include some of the benefits, which might be broadly couched as the social costs that are not specific to ratepayers, but are real. Like ratepayers absolutely pay a cost associated with fossil fuels. And I'm curious how we stand at the state agencies, both the commission, if you're capable, but the Energy Commission and the Public Utilities Commission, in terms of our ability to better account for like the social cost of carbon or other metrics that would help enable better cost accounting and things like fuel switching to become the norm instead of a really difficult thing to do.
We just adopted the social cost of carbon in our cost effectiveness for all of our demand side programs a few weeks ago. So that's happening. And so, and you know, I mean, of course, we account for the social benefits of all of these things. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing them. I mean, and plus they're law. So, and the law recognizes the social benefits of it. So I think the social benefits of clean energy in general are baked into just about everything we do. And with the PUC, the other thing that's baked into everything we do is cost effectiveness. So that's that's the Debbie Downer part that we always have to be aware of, and that we have to make sure that we're getting the best bargain for the ratepayer.
Too, in that they're as a local government, that the decision about what defines cost effectiveness is really one that rests with that entity. And so there are design softwares and other types of tools out there that can think about other benefits, triple bottom line analysis, et cetera, to bolster what is the benefits that you are offsetting your costs with. And so I think that there is, CEC's position is to kind of make sure that that analysis is reasonable, but they're not authorized to really say this is the way you have to do it. And so if a local government wants to have a more broad definition of what is cost effective, I think that gives a lot of flexibility there. I wanted to also go back to the question about the kind of all these different distributed energy resources. I think there's a question of how is that impacting the grid, and who's throttling that, and how are we looking at the quality of the power or energy coming out of those types of homes, facilities, utilities. But I think it's also a question of what is the property owner's willingness to really ensure that those systems are operating as they should be. Deferred maintenance is a thing. That's why we have a D rating for our infrastructure nationally. But I think if we are distributing the grid, what's the new model of serving customers if they are taking on a larger role or load of that utility burden? And redeploying utility service people to kind of check on a home's water heater. Does someone want that? Does that need to come from an extended service of your plumber to make sure that your water heater is kind of appropriately scheduled? And that's not just energy. I mean, that's anything from your irrigation controller and figuring out how you're watering your lawn when you're doing that in a drought. I mean, these are all questions which we need to kind of figure out what is our new comfort level with that as a homeowner or property owner, and having our contributions be managed.
It's like the car maintenance program. It's your house maintenance program. Edgar, before we go, I don't know if we have much time. Is there anybody on the phone who has any questions that we want to ask? Nope. Okay. Let's take one more question, and then I think we can go right here.
Kellen Damon with the County Mayor. Rory, just a question about the SDG&E service story, why their grid impact monetary, borne out by the customer was so high. I don't know if we have any folks from that service area on the phone, or they'd probably be interested in hearing that.
Yeah, the study goes into the details of why the cost differences are, but it's really just the way the distribution systems are designed, and where the homes are in relation to the substation, how many homes are on every substation. All the utilities' distribution systems have been built differently, so there are things like that are reasons for the differences.
Great. Well, thank you all. I'm going to hand it over back to Deborah. And if anybody is anybody interested in working with us on a focus group here on November 7th, can I just meet you afterwards and I'll just take your name and we can do that. So let me give it up to Deborah.
To build on that call, one of the things that we're trying with this forum is using WOVA, which is a social kind of networking meeting app. You might have been emailed about downloading it. That would also be a way to connect. One of the reasons why I'm plugging in it is we're trying to figure out if this is something that we want to use in future forums. And if we really value the networking opportunity that these types of events offer BayREN and its attendees and its members. So if that's something that you've not downloaded yet, but you want to connect with Mindy using WOVA, we'll send out another reminder. I'm going to post the resources at the end of my slides to that as well. But it's kind of a more insular kind of opportunity to network beyond just finding someone on LinkedIn.
Great. Well, I think now we just want to take this time to thank all the speakers again for such a great job and for coming out to San Francisco today. So thank you all.